Who is Benjamin Netanyahu?
Benjamin Netanyahu was not born into ordinary circumstances. He was born into a legacy. October 21st, 1949, just 1 year after the creation of the State of Israel, Benjamin was born in Tel Aviv, a fledgling city and a newborn nation carved from conflict, prophecy, and the ashes of the Holocaust. His family was not wealthy, but they were rich in conviction. His father, Benjamin Netanyahu, wasn't a politician, but he shaped more minds than many who stood behind podiums: a scholar, a historian. Benjamin's work focused on the Spanish Inquisition and Jewish suffering, but his message was always clear. Jews survived not by begging for peace, but by being strong enough to defend it. He was a man of ideology and iron discipline, intellectual but unyielding. And young Benjamin absorbed that like oxygen. His mother, Zila, was the quieter strength, deeply supportive and nurturing, yet always reinforcing the importance of responsibility, duty, and purpose. Benjamin was the second of three brothers. Yonatan, the eldest, charismatic and brave. Benjamin, disciplined and thoughtful. Ido, the youngest, who would go on to become a doctor and writer. The bond between the brothers, especially between Benjamin and Yonatan, was more than familial. It was foundational. Their home in Jerusalem was filled with the intensity of ideas, late-night debates, and the persistent belief that the Jewish people must never again rely on the goodwill of others to survive. As the nation around him struggled to define itself, so did the boy growing up within it. Benjamin Netanyahu was being shaped not by the comforts of childhood, but by the burden of history. The shadow of persecution, the pride of rebirth, and the looming sense that he too would be called to serve. He learned early that leadership wasn't about popularity, it was about permanence. The kind of legacy his father sought in history books, the kind Yonatan would later seek on the battlefield. And as we'll see, that legacy would come to define Benjamin's destiny. From Jerusalem to Philadelphia, from the battlefield to the classroom, a young man begins his journey from soldier to state. American education, military training. In the 1960s, as Israel stood on constant alert, besieged on all sides by hostile neighbors, another journey was unfolding, one that would take Benjamin far from the heat of the Middle East. His father, Benjamin, accepted an academic position in the United States, and the family moved to the quiet suburbs of Philadelphia. There, Benjamin attended Cheltenham High School, blending into American teenage life, but never forgetting where he came from. He went by Ben Netai, a shortened, more Americanized version of his name. While his classmates worried about prom dates and college applications, Ben's mind was elsewhere. He remained deeply tied to Israel, its destiny, its struggles, and his place within it. At 18, he returned to Israel to serve in the military, not as a formality, but as a rite of passage. He joined the Sayeret Matkal, Israel's most elite special forces unit, a team shrouded in secrecy and known for impossible missions deep behind enemy lines. The training was grueling, the missions dangerous. Netanyahu participated in several operations, including a dramatic hostage rescue from a hijacked Sabina Airlines plane in 1972. During one of these missions, he was wounded by gunfire, a scar he would carry both physically and politically for the rest of his life. It was also during these years that the bond with his older brother Yonatan deepened. They were both warriors, both leaders, both shaped by the belief that the Jewish state could only survive through strength and readiness. But it was Yonatan, not Benjamin, who was the shining star in their family's eyes. Charismatic, commanding, a natural-born leader. That spotlight would soon pass under tragic circumstances. After his military service, Benjamin returned to the U.S., this time not as a teenager, but as a war-hardened young man with a mission in mind. He enrolled at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, one of the world's most prestigious universities. There, he earned a degree in architecture, followed by a master's in business management from MIT's Sloan School. He also took political science courses at Harvard, balancing engineering with economics, global theory with real-world urgency. Netanyahu's classmates remembered him as serious, disciplined, and deeply focused, rarely distracted by parties or social games. Even then, he spoke passionately about security, identity, and Israel's place in a hostile world. For a time, he worked as a management consultant in Boston. But the world of corporate meetings and spreadsheets could never contain him. Politics was calling, and then came the moment that would change everything. In 1976, his brother Yonatan Netanyahu was killed in action during Operation Entebbe, a daring raid to rescue hostages held by terrorists in Uganda. Yonatan died a hero, the only Israeli soldier killed in the operation. The nation mourned. The Netanyahu family was shattered. And Benjamin was transformed. His brother's death wasn't just personal. It became a national wound and a personal mission. He returned to Israel not just as a grieving brother, but as a man determined to carry on the legacy, to protect, to defend, and to lead. Diplomat, debater, rising political star. How Netanyahu's global polish and fierce conviction propelled him into the center of Israeli power. Entering the political arena. The death of Yonatan Netanyahu in 1976 marked not only a tragic end, but the beginning of a transformation. Grief became fuel, loss became purpose. And Benjamin Netanyahu was no longer just a soldier or student. He was becoming a symbol of Israeli resilience, of national pride, of strength in the face of terror. But Benjamin didn't storm into politics overnight. He took a more deliberate, strategic path, through the world of diplomacy and global advocacy. In the 1980s, Netanyahu was appointed Deputy Chief of Mission at the Israeli Embassy in Washington. Fluent in English, sharp in presentation, he was soon noticed by high-level U.S. officials and Jewish leaders. From there, he became Israel's ambassador to the United Nations in 1984. In a world often critical of Israel, Netanyahu stood firm, eloquent, forceful, unrelenting. His speeches weren't just diplomatic, they were defiant. He accused the UN of hypocrisy, of failing to protect Israel, of being blind to terrorism. It was at the UN that Benjamin Netanyahu honed his voice, clear, authoritative, and fiercely pro-Israel. He wasn't just speaking to diplomats, he was speaking to Israel's enemies and to its future voters. In 1988, Netanyahu returned to Israel and entered politics formally as a member of the Likud party. The party was right-wing, nationalistic, and deeply skeptical of peace negotiations with hostile neighbors. Netanyahu fit the mold, but he also reshaped it. Within a year, he was appointed Deputy Foreign Minister, then Minister of Housing, then Minister of Finance. He was rising fast, driven by ambition, media savvy, and a talent for confrontation. He mastered television. He used English-language interviews to sway international opinion. He cultivated support from Israel's growing base of conservatives and security hawks. The 1990s were turbulent years for Israel. The Oslo Accords had given hope for peace with the Palestinians. But that hope was soon shattered by a wave of suicide bombings, political unrest, and growing distrust. Then, in 1995, a national tragedy shook Israel to its core. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, the architect of the peace process, was assassinated by a Jewish extremist. The country was in shock. The political climate turned toxic. And into this chaos stepped Benjamin Netanyahu. In 1996, running against Shimon Peres, Netanyahu campaigned on a message of security first. He warned that Israel was rushing into dangerous peace deals. He spoke of strength, borders, and the lessons of history, and he carried the voice of those who felt left behind in the peace process. It worked. At just 46 years old, Benjamin Netanyahu became Israel's youngest ever prime minister. It was a moment of triumph, but the challenges awaiting him would test every ounce of that victory. A prime minister faces war, diplomacy. Prime minister at 46. It was a stunning victory. May 1996. Against all odds, in a deeply divided nation, Benjamin Netanyahu became Prime Minister of Israel, defeating Shimon Peres by the slimmest of margins in the first ever direct election for the post. He was 46 years old, young, sharp, controversial, and bold. The first Israeli Prime Minister born after the founding of the state, the first to grow up both in Israel and in America, and the first to be forged not in the founding generation, but in the fire that followed. Netanyahu entered office with a mission: to slow down the peace process, tighten security, and redefine Israel's global image. He promised to be tough on terrorism, skeptical of concessions, and unbending in defense of Israeli sovereignty. But leadership proved harder than campaigning. He inherited a volatile country, still reeling from Rabin's assassination, still shaken by suicide bombings, and deeply divided between those yearning for peace and those fearing it would come at too high a price. During Netanyahu's first term, violence continued. Palestinian attacks targeted Israeli civilians. Buses exploded, streets ran with fear. Public pressure mounted, from the left demanding progress and the right accusing Netanyahu of betrayal. He walked a tightrope, too hardline for some, too compromising for others. In 1998, Netanyahu surprised many by signing the Wye River Memorandum, an agreement with Yasser Arafat, brokered by U.S. President Bill Clinton. Despite his earlier skepticism, Netanyahu agreed to transfer more territory to Palestinian control in exchange for enhanced security measures. His critics called it hypocrisy, his allies called it strategy. But inside his government, the right turned on him. Coalition members resigned. Ultra-Orthodox parties withdrew support. Netanyahu found himself increasingly isolated. By 1999, public confidence had eroded. Israelis were weary of the deadlock, the bombings, the bitterness. In the next election, Netanyahu was defeated by Ehud Barak, a decorated general promising renewed peace efforts and national unity. Just 3 years after reaching the pinnacle of Israeli power, Netanyahu was out. He resigned from politics, stepped away from the limelight. His enemies cheered, his allies looked elsewhere. But Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. From exile to comeback, how Netanyahu reinvented himself, re-entered the political arena, and returned stronger than ever.
Like and subscribe.
True Icon Stories.